It's an awesome honor to preach this morning on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. Millions of people from around the world have gathered here in New York City to celebrate the flourishing of what was then known as the gay liberation movement, and to honor those activists who have helped push our society towards being more open, honest, and accepting of our sexual differences. I also acknowledge that it is an awesome responsibility to preach this morning on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. No one sermon could possibly do justice to the history, legacy, and experiences, both past and present, of all sexual and gender minorities. So with a mix of humility and joyful pride, I would like to share with you my reflections on this momentous celebration. First, I'd like to discuss what exactly it is we are remembering today from 50 years ago. The events of 1969 are in living memory of some gathered here, and history to those who were born after the fact. For those of us who were born after 1969, it's quite likely that whatever you know about the Stonewall riots was probably gained by your own reading and research. I myself never learned about it in school, and if it weren't for good libraries and the internet, I wouldn't have learned anything about it as a teenager, which I suspect is still the case for most people. And so, in the early morning hours of June 28th, 1969, the first known gay riot in history broke out at the Stonewall Inn, a gay club on Christopher Street in Greenwich Village. Officers from the New York Police Department's Public Morals Squad, with a warrant in hand, arrived at 2 o'clock in the morning and arrested the management and staff for the illegal sale of alcohol. The bar's patrons were asked to leave. A few who presented in drag were arrested. The patrons gathered outside and were joined by other local residents and gay people. The police were noted to be behaving aggressively, and the revolt started. The crowd began throwing pennies at the police officers, which then escalated to throwing cans, rocks, and even a parking meter torn out of the ground. The police officers sought refuge in the bar and locked themselves in, while some militants attempted to set the bar on fire. The flames were put out, police reinforcements from the riot squad arrived, and street fighting continued for several hours. More people were arrested, and some were beaten by the police on the streets, while others were beaten at the police station following arrest. Surprisingly, the bar somehow managed to open the following night, serving only soft drinks. At the time of the Stonewall riots, many of New York's gay bars were in fact owned and operated by the mafia, whose love of financial profit outweighed any moral concerns about homosexuality or gender nonconforming behavior. At this time, gays and lesbians had no legal protections against discrimination, sodomy was a criminal offense, and homosexuality was labeled a mental illness. The state's animus against gay people was so strong that it was actually illegal to operate a gay bar or to serve alcohol to gay patrons. The New York State Liquor Authority banned what were termed disorderly premises and used that rule to shut down hundreds of bars which were viewed as catering to, quote, homosexuals soliciting partners. Simply serving gay clientele beverages could result in a bar being shut down, and customers could be arrested for wearing clothes which didn't conform to their legally assigned sex. It wasn't unheard of in the 60s to see signs on straight bars which warned, "If you are gay, please stay away." 3 years before the Stonewall riots in April 1966, at another Greenwich Village gay bar named Julius's, 3 gay rights activists held what was called a sip-in. Aware of the law forbidding bars to serve homosexual patrons, the 3 activists entered the bar, and as the bartender poured their cocktails, they read from a statement which said, "We are homosexuals, we are orderly, We intend to remain orderly, and we are asking for service. The bartender then refused to serve them, and a lawsuit was initiated, resulting in a court decision that gay people had a right to peacefully assemble, and the presence of homosexuals in and of itself didn't make a bar disorderly. Despite this court ruling, issues clearly persisted, and it wasn't long after the Stonewall riots before someone wrote in chalk on a board at the Stonewall Inn that, quote, "Gay prohibition corrupts cops and feeds mafia greed." Despite the legal issues mentioned so far, it's interesting to note that a bar was actually the most likely place for an event like the Stonewall riots to happen. In the pre-digital age, sexual and gender minorities were often dependent on bars in order to meet one another and form community, in spite of the issues presented by law enforcement or crime syndicates. I think it's also noteworthy that the Stonewall riots are now recognized as being the pivotal turning point in the GLBT rights movement, considering that I am not aware of any other modern civil rights movement which recognizes its origins as being in a place like a bar. The struggle for legal and social acceptance which we celebrate today did not originate in a church, or a temple, or a boardroom, or a classroom, or a legislature, or a judge's chambers, or anywhere of any repute. The civil rights movement we're acknowledging today wasn't brought about by people wearing suits and ties, or a handful of concerned citizens submitting a petition, or a group of professional lobbyists in Albany or Washington. Rather, a group of outsiders who likely had no greater intentions that evening except to revel in some level of intoxication with like-minded individuals, who were fed up with being treated unfairly like deviants and freaks by society and law enforcement, fought back and energized a movement for liberation and acceptance that we still carry on to this day. The fact that the Stonewall riots took place somewhere as informal as a bar is, I think, something we can rightfully celebrate. In our opening words this morning, we heard a reflection on whether pride is a party or a protest. And of course, it's both. It's a protest because we honor those who fought back against police intimidation, because of laws that infringed on people's right to privacy, because of a lack of legal protections against discrimination, because of a lack of legal recognition of people's intimate relationships, because of a misguided sense that people's sexual orientation or gender expression deemed them psychologically unstable, because jobs in the various professions weren't open, because our country still doesn't offer federal protections against discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity, because bullying and hate crimes against GLBT people still happen all too often, because misguided preachers still condemn GLBT people to an eternity of torment in hell, a belief that our Universalist forebears in faith rejected several centuries ago. Because it took until this year to get conversion therapy for minors banned in New York, while 35 states still allow it. Because it took until this year in New York to get the so-called gay and transgender panic defense outlawed in murder trials. Because it took until this year for New York to add gender identity and gender expression to our state human rights and hate crime laws. Because in too many places, people's right to freedom of religion takes precedence over the civil rights of GLBT people. We protest for these reasons and so much more. And yet at the same time, we are not a group of humorless protesters. We are a people who, in spite of the prejudice and barriers encountered daily, still consider it a worthy endeavor to party, to celebrate, and to have a good time. We take to heart the words of the wise preacher from the book of Ecclesiastes this morning, who instructed his congregation to enjoy life, to eat well, to drink with merriment, and to be happy, even though life on earth is hard and we live in a world plagued by chronic injustice. This philosophical hedonism doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye to discrimination and oppression, but it does mean that, given the type of world we live in, it's okay to give ourselves permission to savor the life we've been given, to celebrate who we are, to enjoy the company of one another, and not to ignore the delights of bodily existence. There are people from around the world who are coming to New York this week to do just that, to celebrate the one precious life we've been given by marching, dancing, eating, drinking, hugging, kissing, smiling, learning, laughing, and exploring. Again, this does not negate the real experiences of these same people who have had difficult experiences of coming out, rejection, political persecution, religious hate-mongering, exclusion, or other forms of prejudice. It does mean, though, that by joining together to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots and World Pride, people are taking a leap of faith by celebrating not only the right to assemble in peace, but to also honor those parts of ourselves which are most vulnerable and most intimate, that part which many throughout history have been forced to reject and ignore, rather than letting the soft animal of your body love what it loves, as Mary Oliver said. And this passion for celebration is not just limited to 1 week out of the year. Since the Stonewall riots, GLBT people have been working hard to cultivate places where we can celebrate our uniqueness without the judgment of mainstream society. In the 1970s, pioneering promoters and business owners created a new generation of openly GLBT bars and discotheques that catered to the social, artistic, and erotic tastes of the communities which they served, ushering in a new era of dance and nightlife. This legacy continued through the 80s, 90s, and on to the 21st century. Some of you may have seen the hit TV drama called Pose, or if not, you've probably seen the ads at bus stops or in subway stations. Pose is a kind of historical fiction which centers on the experiences of a group of gay and transgender African Americans and Hispanics who live in New York City and who are active in the ballroom competition scene, and which takes place in the 1980s and early 90s. If you're not familiar with it, the drag ball community, which is still active today, has to do with a subculture in which people compete for trophies and prizes based on walking in various drag competitions. The people who compete in these balls are usually members of a house, which imitate traditional family structures and offer support to people who are usually estranged from their biological families. In Pose, we see the drama of the competitions, the struggles people encountered with homophobia and transphobia, the despair around HIV infections, interpersonal conflicts between house members, and the challenges of creating a stable life with limited resources. And at the same time, despite the relentless struggles, we also see resilience in the face of adversity and a passion for using fashion, music, and dance to elevate the mundane aspects of daily living into a celebration of the tenacity of the free human spirit. This type of relentless resilience and tough tenacity are described best in a 2016 essay by New York-based interdisciplinary artist Sable Elise Smith, whose essay, Ecstatic Resilience, states the following. The dance, however, is not an escape. It is a punctuation. It is about claiming an instant of time and something that can be mine completely. Though at times I share it with others, as we are all our own orbiting planets, spinning in excess in proximity to one another, and sometimes our bodies touch, and there is a transfer, a silent affirmation, We are taking up space at the same time and spinning the most delicate webs out of the strongest material imaginable. This is the dance. This is the work of living between that distinct moment when we push past exhaustion to elation, ecstatic resilience glittering down. This weekend, as we celebrate World Pride, both here in church and out on the streets and sidewalks of our city, may we who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, non-binary, pansexual, two-spirit, and even heterosexual allies, may we push forward in the spirit of Stonewall, a spirit of tenacity and liberation, reveling in the intersubjectivity of our own body selves, until the ecstatic resilience we dream of comes glittering down.
Here at Fourth Universalist, we strive to contribute to the work of a better world. That's why each week we give away half of our offering plate to an organization that shares our values. This month's